My daughter skipped her mother's funeral to attend a birthday party. When I confronted her, she said, "Family is not everything to me. I will choose anything over it." I smiled and left her alone. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Gregory Main from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never thought I'd bury her alone. Not completely alone, of course. There were plenty of people at the funeral. Colleagues, neighbors. My sister flew in from Florida, and our pastor delivered a soft-spoken eulogy that captured only half of the woman I knew. But none of them were her. Not our daughter. Not Emily. I kept looking over my shoulder during the service, half expecting to see her rushing in with apologies, her heels clicking against the church tiles. But her seat, front row, right next to mine, stayed empty. It was almost poetic. The one person who should have sat beside me in grief chose absence instead, and somehow that hurt worse than the weight of the casket 6 men had to carry. After the service, people tried to console me with the usual lines, "She's in a better place. At least she's not in pain. You were lucky to have her this long." I nodded through all of it, offering polite smiles while my insides curled into knots. I didn't want to hear any of it. I wanted my wife back. I wanted the woman who built this life with me, who survived 3 miscarriages before giving birth to our only daughter, who worked beside me in the family company until cancer slowly unraveled her strength. And most of all, I wanted to know why the hell Emily wasn't there. Why she, our daughter, chose to be somewhere else. I was too tired to be angry that day, but exhaustion has a way of numbing your fury just long enough to delay it. It wasn't until the next morning, when my brother-in-law pulled me aside at breakfast, that I found out where she'd gone. He was scrolling through Instagram when he showed me the story, a boomerang of Emily holding a champagne flute, laughing in some rooftop bar in Los Angeles. The caption read, "Best birthday bash ever. Love you, Chloe." My heart didn't break. It snapped, a clean, silent crack that echoed through my ribs. She didn't just miss her mother's funeral. She celebrated. She toasted someone else's life on the same day we buried the woman who gave her hers. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just got up, walked outside, and sat in the car for 23 minutes without moving. I thought back to the last time I spoke to Emily before her mother passed. It was about a work presentation she was supposed to help me with. One of our big investor briefs. She canceled last minute, said she was flying out to recharge. That was always her word when she wanted to escape responsibility. Recharge. My wife, barely strong enough to sit upright, had smiled and said, "Let her go. Let her live how she wants. You'll only chase her further if you don't." That was her gift, grace, even when it wasn't deserved. I tried to adopt it that day. I tried to understand. Maybe grief was too much for Emily. Maybe she didn't know how to process loss. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't emotional paralysis. This was apathy. I called Emily 2 days later. My voice was steady, flat, even. She answered on the second ring, clearly in a cafe. I could hear espresso machines and faint music in the background. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" she asked, cheerful and clueless. I didn't even ask how she was. I just said, "You didn't come to the funeral." She paused, then sighed, like I had brought up a tedious errand she forgot to do. "Yeah, I just felt like I couldn't. I needed space. You know how I get." I didn't respond. She kept going. "Also, I had this party I couldn't miss. Chloe would have killed me. And honestly, I don't want to sound harsh, but family isn't everything to me. I choose what I want over what's expected. That's just who I am." I felt something freeze in my chest. Not anger, something colder. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Okay," I said. "I understand." And I hung up. That was it. No lecture. No guilt trip. Just understanding. Because she'd made her position perfectly clear. Family is not everything. So why should I keep pretending like she was part of one? That evening, I poured myself a drink, something I rarely did, and sat at my desk. I called the bank and revoked her access to the family accounts. I called our HR department, and terminated her internship contract. I even called our estate attorney and updated the trust. She wanted space. She wanted to choose what made her happy. I gave her what she wanted. Cleanly. Completely. That night, I stood in the doorway of what used to be her bedroom. It still smelled faintly of her old perfume, even though she hadn't stayed there in over a year. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe I'd cried all I could for one lifetime. Or maybe this kind of loss, the kind you choose, cuts deeper than death. My wife didn't choose to leave me. Cancer took her. But Emily? Emily walked away smiling, champagne in hand, eyes dry. That distinction carved something permanent into me, something that would never quite heal. People love to talk about unconditional love, especially when it comes to parents and children. But I'm not sure I believe in that anymore. Love should be tested, yes. It should withstand mistakes. But it shouldn't be abused. It shouldn't be taken for granted until it becomes some bottomless well you're expected to draw from forever, even when you're parched. My wife always gave more than she got. I did too. And we both did it for Emily. But there comes a point when continuing to give becomes a form of betrayal to yourself. And in that moment, standing in her empty room, I realized I wasn't willing to betray myself any longer. I slept soundly that night. The house was quiet, and for once, the silence didn't hurt. It felt clean, like fresh air after a storm. I had no idea what would happen the next morning. I didn't know how fast consequences would catch up with Emily. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done making excuses for someone who treated grief like an inconvenience. And if she wanted a life separate from family, I was more than willing to give her that. Completely. I didn't expect her to call again so soon. But 2 days after our last conversation, her name lit up my phone screen while I was reviewing payroll reports at the office. I stared at it for a full minute before hitting decline. There was nothing left to say. I'd heard what I needed to hear. That family was expendable to her. An optional feature. And once someone declares that, it's not a conversation anymore. It's a truth you have to accept. I had accepted it. She hadn't. Not yet. But she would. People always circle back when the well runs dry. When she texted instead, it wasn't even an apology. Just a question. Hey, did something change with the company? HR isn't responding. I didn't respond either. I sat at my desk and thought about how many second chances I'd given her. Thought about the time she maxed out 2 credit cards at 22 and I paid them off without a word. Or the time she lost an entire client file because she went on a weekend trip with friends instead of finishing the quarterly pitch. Each time, I told myself she was just young or finding herself or grieving. But I'd run out of stories to tell myself. I wasn't going to be the villain she needed to feel better about herself. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat in the sunroom, the one my wife used to read in when she couldn't sleep. I stared out at the hedges she had pruned herself for years, now a little overgrown, and thought about the conversation that had sealed everything. Her voice had been so casual, not cruel, but indifferent, like telling someone you prefer coffee over tea. Family is not everything to me. 10 words. That's all it took to unravel 2 decades of sacrifice. And the worst part? I believed her. She meant it. She wasn't being dramatic or manipulative. That was her truth. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. She called again the next morning. I didn't answer. I was halfway through reviewing the new partnership proposal when my assistant, Marianne, walked in looking pale. "Sir, the bank just called," she said, holding out my desk phone. "They said Emily tried to access the joint card and it was declined. She's upset." I waved it off. Let her be upset. Marianne paused for a moment, then quietly asked, "Are you sure this is the right move?" I looked at her. She'd been with us for 12 years. She'd watched Emily grow up. She wasn't judging me, just making sure I was awake to what I was doing. "I'm not punishing her," I said. "I'm accepting what she told me." The next time Emily called, I picked up. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted it documented, spoken out loud between us, so neither of us could pretend later that it didn't happen. "Why the hell are my cards not working?" she snapped. No hello. No softening. Just fury wrapped in entitlement. I was trying to book a flight, and the airline said my payment was declined. Then I tried to call the company, and, "Dad, did you fire me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, a tremble of disbelief. I waited a beat before responding. Yes, I terminated your contract. And I removed you from the family trust. She went silent. Then came the sharp intake of breath I'd heard only once before, the day I told her her mother had stage 4 cancer. But this time, it wasn't grief. It was panic. You can't just do that, she whispered. You can't just cut me off. I kept my voice calm. You said family isn't everything. I'm honoring that. Her voice rose an octave. I didn't mean it like that. I was upset. You're seriously ruining my life over one comment. I almost laughed. Ruining her life? She hadn't even lived it yet. Not really. Not without a safety net. You made a choice, I said. And now I'm making one too. We're even. She screamed something. I don't remember what. And the call ended with a click so hard I imagined the screen on her phone might have cracked. I set mine down and stared at the wall for a while. I wasn't proud of how calm I was. It made me wonder if I had finally stopped feeling anything at all. But I wasn't numb. I was resolved. And there's a difference. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wasn't going to let her keep hurting me. That afternoon, Marian knocked softly on my office door again. She had a concerned look on her face, the kind that said she was about to overstep, but she couldn't help herself. I know it's none of my business, she began, but I just want to say, I think you did the right thing. Maybe not the easy thing, but the right one. I looked up at her, surprised. You do? She nodded. You and your wife gave her everything. And sometimes, people think unconditional love means unconditional resources. But those aren't the same thing. Her words hit me harder than she probably intended. I nodded in return, grateful for the validation. I went home that night and didn't check my phone. I didn't refresh social media or reread old texts. I made myself dinner, ate in silence, and opened the windows to let in the late summer breeze. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel haunted. The grief was still there, of course. Grief for my wife, grief for the daughter I once had, but it didn't own me. It sat beside me, quiet and unthreatening, like an old friend who finally stopped demanding attention. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not forgetting, but learning how to share space with what broke you. I knew things were about to get worse before they got better. I knew Emily would retaliate. She'd post something, call someone, twist the story to make herself the victim. That's how she operated. Deflect, distract, destroy. But I also knew something she didn't. Stories don't save you when they're built on lies. And the truth, ugly, inconvenient, irreversible, was now a part of her record. She missed her mother's funeral. She chose a party. She declared family didn't matter. And when the consequences came, she acted like a crime had been committed. But the only crime, really, was pretending love could survive in a space where respect no longer existed. The phone rang before I even got my coffee that morning. I just pulled into the office parking lot, keys still in the ignition, when her name lit up the screen again. I let it ring once, twice. I almost didn't answer. God knows I'd had enough. But something told me this one was different. The panic in her voice yesterday hadn't sounded rehearsed. This was the moment her world shifted. I picked up and didn't say a word, just waited. Dad. She breathed, sharp and fast. Dad, the bank just called me. They said I'm no longer authorized on the family account. What's going on? My credit cards aren't working, none of them. I'm stuck at the airport. I literally can't check in. Her voice cracked as she kept talking, words tumbling out too fast, like a child who realized too late that the stove was hot. They said I don't have a corporate card anymore. No health insurance either? What is happening? I could hear the anxiety in her breathing, shallow and fast, and for a moment, a brief, flickering moment, I felt the weight of 24 years of parenting press on my chest, but I didn't let it show in my voice. You're not stuck, I said calmly. You have options. You're an adult. Book a new flight. Pay with your own card. Call a friend. That's what grown-ups do. She didn't respond right away. Then, you canceled everything? Her voice wasn't angry now. It was stunned. Hello. You really did it. I thought you were just mad. I exhaled slowly. No, Emily. I wasn't mad. I was hurt. And I believed you when you said family isn't everything to you. The silence that followed was longer than I expected. A soft rustle. Maybe she sat down on the terminal bench or leaned against a wall. Then came the begging. Not explosive or theatrical, but raw and trembling. I messed up, okay? I said something I didn't mean. I wasn't thinking straight. You can't just, Dad, please. You can't just cut me out like this. I let the pause hang for a few beats before answering. I didn't cut you out, Emily. I just stepped back. You made it clear where I stand in your life. All I did was believe you. The words didn't come from anger. They came from finality. And I think that's what hurt her the most, that I sounded like I was already gone. You're seriously going to abandon me over one comment? She asked, now defensive, claws reemerging. Over one missed day? Mom would never. She would have understood. She wouldn't have thrown me to the wolves. And there it was. The pivot. The guilt card. The invocation of her mother. As though the woman she ignored at death's door would now rise from the grave to scold me on her behalf. Don't bring your mother into this, I said, my voice sharpening for the first time. You don't get to use her memory as a shield now. You weren't there when it mattered. You chose a party over her funeral. That's not a misstep. That's character. Her voice wobbled. I was scared. I almost believed her. Almost. But scared of what? Mourning? Responsibility? Or being reminded of how deeply she'd drifted from us long before her mother died. So was I said. But I showed up. I stood there and buried my wife. I faced the grief. Alone. I heard a soft sob break through the line, and I closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't what I wanted. I hadn't waited 24 years to sever ties. I never wanted a daughter I had to disown. But want doesn't matter when someone else makes the choice for you. I didn't walk away. She left first. All I did was finally stop calling after her. I have nothing now, she whispered. No money. No job. Nothing. Her words landed like a confession. Not angry. Not manipulative. Just true. And I let that truth sit in the space between us. Then maybe now, I said softly, you'll figure out who you are without the safety net. She didn't respond. I didn't hang up. I just listened to the sound of her quiet crying, the same way I had once listened to her whimper through fevers and scraped knees. But this time, I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't grab my coat or my wallet or my keys. I just sat there, parked outside the office, staring at the same front doors I used to walk through with her when she interned last summer. Back when we still believed proximity could fix disconnection. By the time she finally hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in her pain. No pleasure in her panic. Just grief. A different kind than what I'd felt when I buried my wife. This was the grief of letting go of someone who was still alive. The grief of accepting that your child has become a stranger. It's a quieter ache, but somehow deeper. Because with death, there's closure. With this, there's just distance and memory and a hollow kind of finality that no ceremony can wrap in flowers. When I finally walked into the office, Marian glanced up from her desk, her expression unreadable. She didn't ask how the call went. She just nodded, offered me the morning brief, and let me pass without comment. I appreciated that more than she knew. Everyone else in my life wanted to offer their 2 cents, their analysis, their sympathy. But what I needed now wasn't advice. It was resolve. And silence is sometimes the strongest support you can offer someone who just put down a loved one. Figuratively or literally. I didn't tell anyone at work what happened. The HR team knew the basics, of course. They processed the paperwork, flagged the revoked credentials, but they didn't know the story. And I wanted to keep it that way. Let them think it was a restructuring decision or a mutual parting of ways. The truth was too complicated, too intimate, to share with people who only knew us from quarterly meetings and elevator small talk. Let the story fade quietly. Let her figure out the rest. That night, I deleted her emergency contact info from our system. It was small, mechanical, and cold, but symbolic. I couldn't protect her from herself anymore. I couldn't keep pretending we were still on the same side of the line. And maybe that's what fatherhood is sometimes, knowing when to save and when to let go. I tried the first for too long. It was time to try the second. It started with a call from my sister, Janine. She wasn't angry, not yet, just curious, the way people get when they've heard one side of a story and want to know if the other side will confirm it or crush it. Hey, she said casually, I heard from Emily. She said something about the company letting her go and freezing her accounts. She sounded really upset. I could hear the soft clink of dishes in the background, probably loading her dishwasher while casually dropping a bomb into my morning. I kept my voice even. Yeah, that happened. Janine paused, the silence stretching just a second too long. Okay, and why exactly? She made it sound like it came out of nowhere. I could have launched into the whole story, about the funeral, the Instagram post, the coldness in her voice when she dismissed her own mother's death, but I didn't. Not because I wanted to protect Emily, but because I knew how this worked. The more you explain, the guiltier you sound. And I wasn't interested in defending a decision made with a clear head. She chose to miss her mother's funeral, I said simply. I decided not to fund that kind of behavior anymore. Another pause. Wow, Janine breathed. Okay, that's a lot. I could hear the judgment curling at the edge of her voice, even if she hadn't meant it. Family always expects you to tolerate more than anyone else would. By the end of the week, the calls started to multiply. Cousins, a couple of old family friends. One even sent me a concerned email with the subject line, "Everything okay with Emily?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I already knew where this was going. She was telling her version of the story, the one where I was the villain, the heartless father who cut her off without warning, like I was some petty tyrant exacting revenge for a single misstep. And I could picture exactly how she told it too. Eyes welling up just enough to draw sympathy, voice trembling at all the right moments, sprinkling in just enough truth to make her version sound believable. Then came the post. I didn't see it myself, don't even have an Instagram account, but a friend from the firm forwarded it to me, along with a note. Thought you should see this. It was a black and white photo of her and her mother from years ago, back when Emily was maybe 16, smiling in a way she hadn't in recent memory. The caption read, "Lost my mom, then my place in the world. Some parents punish grief instead of helping you through it. But I'll rise anyway. Watch me." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "You're so strong. Your dad is trash. Sending love, girl." And of course, cut toxic people out, even if they're blood. I didn't feel angry when I read it. I felt tired. Tired of the performance. Tired of the narrative manipulation. Tired of watching my daughter play the protagonist in a story where I was cast as the villain simply for having a boundary. I closed the email and deleted it. I didn't respond. I didn't text her. I didn't engage. Because the truth is, when people are committed to misunderstanding you, there's nothing you can say that will change their mind. Silence, at some point, becomes its own form of clarity. A few days later, Marian knocked gently on my office door again. She'd been quiet lately, professional, respectful, but I could tell she had something to say. "You okay, sir?" she asked softly, stepping inside. I saw the post. I gave her a tired smile. "Of course you did. Everyone has." She hesitated, then sat down across from me. "I don't mean to overstep, but this isn't about the company, is it? It's about the funeral. About her not being there." I didn't say anything, just leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. She continued, gentler now. "You're not a bad father for holding her accountable. I've seen what you've done for her. You gave her more chances than anyone I know would have." Her words were a balm I didn't know I needed. I wasn't looking for validation, but hearing it out loud, especially from someone who'd witnessed it all up close, meant more than I expected. "It's just hard," I admitted finally. Not because of the money, not because of the company, but because she was the last piece I had of her mother. And now that piece feels, I trailed off, unable to finish. Marian nodded. "She may be gone right now, but she's not erased. And you didn't do this to her. She made a choice. You just accepted it." That night, I opened the old family photo albums. I hadn't touched them in months. The first page was a picture of all three of us on the front steps of the house, taken the day Emily got her acceptance letter to college. My wife's eyes were wet in that photo, pride and fear all wrapped into one. Emily looked radiant, youthful, untouched by cynicism. I stared at that picture for a long time, my fingers tracing the edge of the page like the texture might unlock some memory I'd buried. But all I could think was, how did we get here? At some point, love becomes a battlefield, not because it was always doomed, but because one person started building walls while the other kept handing over blueprints for a home. I kept trying to give her something solid, and she kept trying to escape it. So maybe this wasn't betrayal. Maybe this was just difference. She never wanted the life we built. She never felt tethered to the same things. And as much as that breaks me, I can't blame her for wanting something else. I can only blame her for burning the bridge on her way out. Before I went to bed that night, I thought about texting her. Just one line. Something neutral. But I didn't. Because I knew what it would invite. The dance. The cycle. The twisted merry-go-round of hurt and half-apologies. I wasn't interested in writing it anymore. I didn't need to win the public battle. I just needed peace. And sometimes, peace looks like letting someone lie about you if it means you get to stop bleeding. She showed up on a Tuesday. Unannounced. No warning. I was coming back from the grocery store, just 2 bags of essentials, milk and fruit and coffee, when I saw her car parked out front. It took me a second to recognize it. She hadn't used that old sedan in years. It must have been all she had left after the cards were canceled and the job evaporated. She was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, like she was preparing for war but hadn't decided which direction to point the guns. I slowed my steps, gripping the bags a little tighter. Part of me thought about turning around, just getting in the car again and leaving her there. But that would have been cowardly. And whatever else I've been in this story, I haven't been a coward. She pulled the sunglasses off when I got close enough. Her face was thinner, eyes tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and I tried, genuinely tried, not to let that get to me. She spoke first. You really weren't going to respond to me? Her voice was low, cracked, and not nearly as angry as I expected. I've been trying to get you to talk to me for over a week. I showed up at the office. They wouldn't let me in. I texted Mary Ann. She said she wasn't allowed to give out your schedule. I unlocked the front door and held it open behind me. Come inside, I said, without looking back. She followed, slowly, like she wasn't sure if the house would still recognize her. The living room hadn't changed. Same couch, same framed photos, same air that still smelled like lavender and lemon, my wife's favorite candle combination. Emily stood in the doorway like a guest. She didn't sit, just hovered, glancing around like she was surprised it hadn't collapsed in her absence. I set the groceries down and walked into the kitchen without offering her anything. No drink, no hug, nothing. I needed her to feel that distance, to know that this wasn't going to be a scene of soft forgiveness. She finally broke the silence. You disowned me. I didn't turn around. I respected your boundaries, I said. You said family wasn't everything. I believed you. She let out a shaky breath, part laugh, part cry. It was a stupid thing to say. She paused. I was angry and immature, but you took it to a level I didn't think you were capable of. Now I turned, leaned against the counter, and looked at her. You weren't there when your mother died, Emily. You skipped her funeral. That wasn't immaturity. That was choice. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't know how to deal with it, she said. Every time I saw her getting weaker, I felt like I was disappearing too. I didn't want to remember her that way. I wanted to remember her how she was before all of this. That's the thing about grief. It warps people, makes cowards of some, saints of others. And I could almost understand what she was saying. Almost. But avoidance doesn't excuse abandonment. You know what I wanted? I asked. I wanted to bury my wife with my daughter standing beside me. I wanted you to look at her coffin and feel what I felt. Not because it would have fixed anything, but because it was the last thing she deserved. Presence. That's all. Not perfection. Not even forgiveness. Just presence. Her tears started then, silent, slow, falling one by one like they weren't sure if they belonged there. I messed up, she whispered. I know I did. I didn't respond. I didn't comfort her. I let the weight of her own admission settle in. She looked around the room again, her eyes landing on the photo of us 3 at the beach, sunburned and smiling. I miss her every day, she said. More than I thought I would. More than I know how to deal with. I nodded. So do I. But I don't get to skip the hard parts because they're painful. That's not how love works. She sat down then, finally, curling into the edge of the couch like a child. What now, she asked. What happens to us? It was a fair question, one I'd been avoiding myself. I sat in the chair across from her, hands clasped together. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know what won't happen. We're not going back to how things were. The company isn't yours anymore. The trust isn't yours anymore. That's done. Her head dropped. I figured. I leaned forward. This isn't about punishment. It's about trust. You broke it. And trust isn't something you beg for. It's something you rebuild. Over time. with action. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so painfully of her mother's it nearly gutted me. Do you think we'll ever get there? I don't know, I said again, because it was the only true answer I had. She stood slowly, walked toward the door, and turned just before leaving. I'm sorry, she said. Not a grand apology. Not a plea. Just that, quiet, small, and human. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a stranger was standing in front of me. She closed the door behind her, and I stood there for several minutes, unsure whether to feel lighter or heavier. The house returned to silence, and I was alone again. But something about the way she walked away this time, it didn't feel as final. I walked upstairs and opened the door to her old bedroom. It was still untouched, neat and stale, like a museum of what once was. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked around. The bookshelf still held her favorite childhood novels. The desk had a small sticky note from her mother, faded with time. Don't forget to eat breakfast. Love you. I stared at that note for a long time. My wife had known how to love her gently, even when she didn't deserve it. I tried to follow her lead, but I wasn't my wife. I loved with structure, with expectation, with hard lines. And maybe that wasn't wrong. Maybe it was just different. The weeks after her visit were quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just still. No calls, no emails, no cryptic online posts. Emily had returned to whatever life she was piecing together without the scaffolding of our family name, and I had returned to mine. A home with too many echoes, a company that now ran a little leaner, and a grave that I visited every Sunday, rain or shine. I spoke to my wife more often in death than I had in her last months of life, and the irony of that wasn't lost on me. There's something about talking to someone who can't respond that makes you more honest, more human. And in that silence, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a speech or an apology. It arrives in the absence of chaos. I didn't know what Emily was doing, and I didn't ask. People who know our family occasionally offered updates without me requesting them. I saw your daughter at the cafe on 5th. She's temping at a design firm, I think. She looked different. Grown. I thanked them, nodded, and changed the subject. I didn't need to know the details. Her healing, or her unraveling, was hers to own now. That was the hardest lesson of all, that letting go wasn't just an act of punishment or protection. It was an acknowledgement that you can't fix what doesn't want fixing. You can love someone and still step away. You can mourn a relationship while protecting your dignity. Those things aren't contradictions. They're survival. One morning, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in familiar slanted print. I knew immediately it was from her. I carried it to the kitchen table and stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a single page. No preamble, no drawn-out story. Just a letter. Dad, it began, I'm not writing to beg. I'm writing to thank you. For not shielding me. For letting me fall. For not calling when I cried wolf. I hated you for it. But now I think I understand. Love isn't always warm. Sometimes it's sharp. And now I know what it feels like to earn something instead of inherit it. I'm working. I'm paying rent. I miss you. I miss Mom. I'm still figuring things out. But I'm doing it on my own. I thought you should know. I didn't cry when I read it. But I did sit in silence for a long time afterward, staring out the window as the wind moved through the hedges. I imagined her somewhere else in the city, waking up to an alarm clock she bought with her own paycheck, making coffee in a tiny kitchen, wondering if I'd read her words. I had, and I believed them. Not because they were perfectly written, but because they weren't. They were messy, sparse, unpolished, and that made them real. But belief doesn't always mean re-entry. Just because someone reaches out doesn't mean the door swings wide open. Sometimes it just unlocks, slightly. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer where I kept her baby bracelet and her high school graduation speech. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. I needed time. And maybe she did too. There's a strange grace in distance. You learn to love someone again without needing to be near them, without needing to control their story or clean up their mess. You just hold space, quietly, respectfully. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't healed either. I wasn't waiting for an apology or a dramatic reunion. I was just existing, day by day, week by week. And for the first time in a long time, That was enough. Marion noticed the shift in me before I did. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon as we wrapped up a meeting. "Or maybe just less clenched." I laughed, the sound catching me off guard. "I think I stopped expecting things to go back to the way they were," I told her. "That helps." She nodded, letting go of the idea of fairness. That was the hardest part for me, with my sister. But once you do, it's like your body remembers how to breathe again. I didn't ask about her sister. I didn't need to. Pain recognizes pain. And there's something sacred about mutual survival. As the holidays approached, I set the table for one. I cooked a smaller meal. I still put out 2 wine glasses, though. I couldn't quite let go of that part yet. My wife had always loved Cabernet on Christmas Eve, and even though I rarely drank anymore, I poured one for her out of habit. I sat in the living room, the fireplace flickering, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood in winter, and I felt the weight of solitude not as punishment, but as truth. My life was smaller now, but it was mine, not built on guilt or expectation or performance, just reality. I looked over at the untouched wine glass across from me and spoke aloud, voice soft but sure. "She wrote to me," I said. "She's finding her way." I didn't answer. "Not yet, but I will. One day." The fire popped quietly in response. Maybe it was just the wood. Maybe it was something more. I don't know. I've stopped needing everything to mean something. Sometimes a fire is just a fire. And sometimes silence says more than words ever could. I still don't know if I'll ever fully reconcile with Emily. I don't know if I'll ever see her at the head of a conference room again, or watch her laugh in the kitchen while she stirs a pot of soup like her mother used to. I don't know if she'll come to my funeral, or if she'll choose absence again. What I do know is this: the boundary I set saved me. It gave me my self-respect back. It reminded me that love isn't endless if it isn't reciprocated. And while I may never regain what I lost, I no longer feel ashamed for drawing the line. I did what I had to do to stop the bleeding. And sometimes, the truest inheritance you can give someone is your absence, so they can learn to stand on their own feet. Even if they hate you for it. Even if they rewrite the story. Even if the world calls you heartless. Because real love doesn't always rescue. Sometimes it releases. What would you do if your own child turned her back on the family, not just in words, but when it mattered most? Is there ever a right moment to draw the line, even with your own blood? I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose peace over connection, or walk away from someone who thought you'd never stop giving? Share your story in the comments. And if this hit close to home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I've got more real-life stories just like this coming soon. See you soon.